away to inflation and the kind of story that's emerging on that front. The macro data that we got earlier this evening is pointing at retail inflation for June rising. Now it's come in at 4.81%, which means it's clearly much higher than 4.3% that we reported in May. This rise in inflation primarily on account of higher food prices. So far, retail inflation remains within the tolerance band of the RBI. But meanwhile, we've seen these IIP numbers as well, industrial production numbers for the month of May. That number has come in at 5.2%. It is higher than 4.2% that was reported in the month of April. So let's understand these numbers. And for that, senior economist Upasna Bhardwaj, who is part of Kotak Mahindra Bank, is joining us. Upasna, good evening. Clearly, we don't have the favorable base effect. And now these vegetable prices have been on the rise. I mean, look at how much our tomatoes cost. So in your opinion, from an economist standpoint, what was the greatest contributing factor for the rise in inflation this time? Did it actually rise much higher than your own estimates?
Yes, absolutely. We were expecting the headline inflation to be 4.64%. So clearly it has overshot that percentage. And largely the difference is led by the food inflation category. If we were to just look at the food inflation breakup, it is quite a broad-based increase in food inflation on a month-on-month basis. It has been led by eggs, it has been led by cereals, it has been led by vegetables, of course. I mean, we have talked enough about the tomato prices, but it's not just tomato prices. There is a reasonable near double-digit month-on-month increase in potato prices, onion prices as well. But having said that, these are the perishable items which are very seasonal, movements that we are seeing in this category. Largely every year during the monsoons, either because of deficiencies or because of excessive rains, we tend to see these kind of disruptions happening, and which tend to cause supply shocks. So I think on the vegetable prices, we will see moderation going ahead. In fact, for tomato prices, we've already seen some kind of supply side intervention, which the central government has provided for across various states. Because of the excessive floods or because of issues associated with either production or supply or distribution. So they have been providing some kind of benefits out there. Clearly, so vegetable prices I do expect in the near term clearly would be continuing to be on the upside. But I think beyond a month or two, we should start seeing the moderation in vegetable prices also subsequently happen. The bigger point of worry is on other factors and how eventually rains will pan out, and whether we will see any kind of sustained up move that is happening on the rice prices and also on the pulses. I'm going to be watching these two categories much more closely to see whether it has any sustainable impact or upside impact on inflation.
Yes, you did mention the monsoon and how it's going to pan out here on. Retail inflation rate, that was expected to rise more or less in June, Upasna. With this ongoing heavy rains after we've seen that subpar monsoon in June, we were expecting food prices to go up. But do you think we should expect this upward trend now to continue? And how do you think that is going to stay within the RBI's acceptable range? At about 4.6% is what we see it do in the first quarter. And already in the last two meetings of the MPC, the RBI has left the repo rate unchanged at 6.5%. So how much does this latest print likely now to change the course on inflation control for the RBI? When they come out with their decision on the 10th of August, what do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, so first quarter average inflation is at 4.6%, which is in line with what RBI had projected. Secondly, the near-term upside risk to food inflation that you're referring to will continue because we still have to see the exact spatial distribution of how rains will pan out. The next, I think, 4 to 5 weeks of rainfall is going to be very crucial in defining how exactly is going to be, how much is going to be the upside to the existing scenario on the inflation side. One thing to point out is the favorable base effect, which was supporting the April and the May readings, are now slowly fading off. Even though there's some amount of base effect, which is favorable, but it's fading off. And because of that, irrespective of whatever the reading was, the trend was expected to be on the higher side. So now the coming 2 quarters, at least, the inflation will be more anchored around 5.5% average. The 2 quarters that we're talking about, Q2 and Q3 of this financial year. Having said that, we will start seeing the trend back towards closer to 5% by the last quarter of this financial year. This is, of course, assuming, like I said, that vegetable prices will resume back on the downward trajectory after a quarter. Near-term upside, and then there's some subsiding that happens after 2-3 months. In that context, I think RBI would prefer to be on a wait-and-watch mode. I don't really expect RBI to respond to the near-term supply shocks and the possible impact on inflation, because at the moment we're not seeing the inflation trajectory which RBI has is foreseeing for the year ahead deviating too much. So unless that really changes, I don't think RBI is going to change its course. More importantly, in fact, I think I would point out is the global situation, which is something which we'll have to monitor to really observe how RBI can act. And the very reason why we can be more comforted on saying that there'll be a pause on the upcoming policies, also because the US CPI inflation has also surprised slightly on the downside. So which is a good move here because it eases some of the pressure which was building up ahead of the CPI reading for the US and the possible pressure on RBI also.
Yes,
so I think that is also
absolutely.
there. So we're looking for a pause.
But does it help, Upasna, that our industrial production has risen by 5.2% if you consider it year on year? How much is that going to help our economy now? Do you think that's something that will see further rises now that you're seeing that kind of upward momentum in power generation as well, which was in negative territory? It's moved up to 0.9%, and the big factor is manufacturing. So will that continue and help the economy?
Absolutely. I think, the IIP numbers have been good. We were expecting 5%. It's even better than that. So it's clearly a good sign that the state of the economy is looking robust, resilient for now. One thing important to keep in mind is that the global slowdown, which was really expected to hit the overall global economy, has been postponed to an extent. I think that is also supporting a lot domestic economy as well. The manufacturing sector is supported. In fact, if we look at the breakup of consumer durable category, we've seen the first positive growth after quite a few months. So the overall urban-rural demand is holding up well. Global demand is not slowing as much as what we were anticipating earlier. All of this is fairly conducive for a resilient economy. And also overall, the first quarter of this financial year has a very reasonable base effect, and that too will keep the GDP growth of the first quarter also reasonably strong. We'll have to wait and watch for how eventually the global situation pans out and how the fading pent-up demand domestically also pans out to give us a clearer picture on whether we'll be able to sustain these kind of numbers going ahead.
Fair enough. Upasna, thanks very much for getting us that perspective from an economist. Of course, it also means, as far as the state of the Indian economy right now, there are several moving pieces, and of course, globally as well, because demand situation, now that we are exporting that much more, we were just talking to my colleagues about the higher exports of iPhones. There is so much more concentration on manufacturing here in India. How much of that picks up momentum? All of these are moving pieces, and how much that reflects in the numbers is going to be watched very closely. We'll keep reconnecting with you. Upasna, thanks very much for joining us. But bringing